Good morning. We're going to talk about Chapter 19, Lecture B. Okay, today we are going to get into World War One in detail. I will tell you, as you're getting ready to do your Chapter 19 reaction quizzes, I have not posted anything from Chapter 19 yet. I will probably over the weekend. I've still got to finish some things. You're going to read for your reaction quiz two primary sources. Your primary sources are going to revolve around 14 points. We'll get to here in a little bit, which was Wilson's plan for peace. And then you're going to look at the Treaty of Versailles. Well, the Treaty of Versailles is a couple hundred pages long. I'm not going to make you read all that, obviously, but I'm going to highlight and tell you pages to read. And what you're going to look at is comparing 14 points to the Treaty of Versailles, which was what the actual peace treaty was. What I want you to come away with as we go through this World War One is the impact that the war will have on Europe. Not just the obviously that thousands die and all that, but I want you to understand after today and going into next week, when you read the Treaty of Versailles, 14 points, how there was several different ways to approach the war. America's perception is not going to be the world perception. The world perception is not going to be universal. And the Treaty of Versailles is what the end result that will end the war, and what President Wilson was trying to get 14 points are going to be similar, but yet very, very, very different. And that's something critically I want you to understand. And that's why I'm working on amending this assignment. Also, be very thorough on this assignment. This assignment will be used dual credit validation thing. So I've got to turn this in and then randomly selected a couple of you works, which I will black out the name, will be selected for the university to see. But I want to let you know, be very, very thorough on this assignment when I post it. I'll give you some extra time with it. But it's really sad how much of stuff the Treaty of Versailles and the 14 points could have avoided future events. We'll get into them more later. But when you read those two sources, we're going to talk about it in class a lot. But when you read through those two primary sources, a lot more information is going to make a lot more sense to you. And if you've taken my American history class with me, those of you that go to Rockport, you understand how I build this picture about how World War One really feeds World War II. World War II is really not, shouldn't be World War II. It should be really World War 1.5, right? It's the extension of World War One, and that's something I want you to understand, and we'll get into more detail. Okay, talked about the powers yesterday. German forces will quickly overrun Belgian forces. So one thing of note is we kind of talked about, I led up a little bit, causes of World War One. There's a lot of them. You have militarism, nationalism, this arms race, alliances, this general feeling we just want to fight, we're superior. And then the killing of the Archduke, the last initiative there is like the catalyst that gets everything going, the powder keg. The Germans aren't going to sit back and wait. Though this is not initially a war that they're necessarily want to be concerned about, they're going to be dragged into it because part of the alliances. So Franz Ferdinand, who is assassinated, Austrian-Hungarians, who the Germans were alliance with, they wanted to basically take it out on the country that was responsible, which was Serbia. And Serbia could not meet these demands. Russia had an alliance with Serbia to protect them, the common Slavic ancestor, or whatever you want to call it. They were basically, Russia says, we're going to protect them. Well, it institutes all these alliances going off, dragging Germany, Russia, and others into the war. But initially, England is not in the war. They renege on the French part. The French have not been attacked yet, and they're like, well, we're going to stay out. But then the Germans have a plan called the Schlieffen Plan. And if you get into study on this, very good plan overall, but there's obviously some faults with it. The Germans are going to be in it to win it. How many of you ever played sports in here? Most of you, I think, played in here. I think most of you played. You don't just play sports to go through the motions, do you? You play to what? Win. So the Germans, they want to go take out the French as quick as possible. They asked to go through Belgium. Belgium says no. They go anyway. When they go through Belgium, that brings Great Britain. Great Britain no longer can be on the sidelines. They had a secret alliance to protect Belgium in the event of war. And when the Germans storm through Belgium, that brings the British into the war. German forces will quickly go through Belgium, overrun their forces, and will make it deep, deep into France. before there's a stalemate. And I think they'll get close to 25 miles of Paris. And this is where the war will bog down. Quickly, within months, the war bogs down. And then the borders of the war will relatively stay unchanged for 3.5, 4 years. We're talking a few miles is it. And if you go into drawings, you look at the trenches. These trenches become very, very complex. And they are, like I said, less than a few miles apart. And that's the front of the war. Actually, they go back and forth. It's a seesaw. It's kind of pointless. In one battle alone, 600,000 French and German soldiers will die at the Battle of Verdun. In some of these battles, several 100,000, close to 1 million troops will fight in some of these battles. It's unprecedented. We have not seen this scale of war ever. And honestly, we don't see this scale of war even in World War II. If you want to be honest. We see some of it a little bit with the Germans and the Russians fighting, or the Soviets in Russia. But to the extent of where you have 300,000 troops on one side, 300,000 fighting each other, we don't see that scale. It's incredible. To put it in perspective, this battle of Verdun, it would be like Kansas City and St. Louis duking it out on the battlefield. It's incredible. This will also deal a severe blow to the optimism and self-confidence of Western civilization. Because up to this point, Western civilization, Western Europe, had been the pinnacle of the world. But now, with this war unfolding, the devastation of it, it's going to switch perspectives. The world at war. Wave upon wave of American troops will march into the bloody stalemate, nearly 2 million before the war is in. These doughboys, a nickname for American soldiers, were largely experienced, but they were fresh, so the presence immediately boosted the morale of Allied force. I think this PowerPoint is actually out of order. Yeah, I'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. So by the war's end, the United States will be brought in, and we'll send nearly 2 million troops to this. But how did we get into the war? Because 1914, if you remember, yesterday I went into great detail. We're not sending 2 million troops in 1914 to France, are we? We're dealing with Mexico. But we're going to remain what's called neutral, and we're going to have a military preparedness to some degree. In 1914, President Wilson declared the United States neutral. Americans were heavily divided over this. Some wanted to join the war, some wanted to remain neutral at all costs. There's a lot of division in the United States over it. In fact, in 1916, Wilson will run on "I kept you out of the war" motto, which is pretty popular. In 1915, the Germans will make a bad decision, though it is not the cause of America's entering the war. They will sink the Lusitania. It was a British passenger liner. About 100 Americans were on board. The Germans are going to claim there was weapons from the United States on this ship, and the United States will adamantly deny that. The reality is there was weapons, ammunitions and stuff going to the British from America on the ship, secretly. I mean, we were very, very supportive of the British, and advertently, and everything. And the Germans knew this. Wilson sent the United States on a policy preparedness. We better be ready. So we started building up our forces just a little bit, not full scale yet. The British were very, very clever at this point. Is communication very fast at this point in the world? No. They don't have their Twitter accounts, their Facebooks, blogging about it, vlogging about it. You know, Brock's not over here. You're like, oh, look at what's going on over here in Europe, right? We don't know.
I thought they had that wire.
They did. It's a great point, Zach. They had the Atlantic cable. The British cut it. Why did the British cut it? So we can't communicate. Thus, all the information that comes to the United States is from the British. All from the British perspective. The British were throwing crazy things out there like the Germans were eating babies. They were sacrificing. They were savages. I don't know if they were saying the babies part, but That was the kind of the mindset, right? The Germans are savage. They're horrific. They're bad. If they win, the world is lost. They were demonizing the Germans. Were the Germans doing any of this? No. There was some atrocities committed by the Ottoman Turks against Armenian Christians, and that's another thing we could talk about later. But the reality, the Germans were not different than the French or the British during this war. And I want you to understand the Germans are not the same group of people that they are in World War II. There is no Holocaust. There's no genocide by the Germans. In fact, is this a war that is caused solely by Germany? No. It's caused by all of Europe. It's a much different war. So, the Singing and Lusitania, our natural flavor or belief that the British are superior and better. The British propaganda. America's opinion is starting to shift, is it not? We are very, very much pro-British. There is some anti-German feeling in the country by this point. In 1916, after the Lusitania, the Germans said, we are going to do the Sussex Pledge. We're not going to sink any more unrestricted warfare on vessels. That's a goal. Well, that's great. The Germans are going to recant. They're going to back up a little bit. They're not going to sink everything going to the British. Yay. Wilson wins a close re-election, but he also ran and kept you out of the war. Fast forward to 1917. The British are desperately trying to get the Americans to enter the war. By 1917, the war is a stalemate. Millions have died. The French are taking heavy casualties. Remember that slide I accidentally said earlier. Nearly 2 million American soldiers are going to come to the war and fight in it, right? But 1917, those 2 million soldiers are still back on the farm in the United States doing nothing related to the war. British spies are going to get the golden nugget they've been looking for. 1917, the Germans are going to send an ill-fated telegram to Mexico. To back up a little bit, in 1914-15, the Germans have plucked out of, I believe, Switzerland, a man named Lenin, Vladimir Lenin. Sent him back to Russia with $10 million in weapons and ammunition to start a revolution. Guess what he did? Started a revolution, completely transformed Russia, took Russia out of the war in 1917. Achieved their goal, right? If you took my American history classes with me, we talked about that in great detail. That is what the creation of the Soviet Union and their socialist communist ways. The Germans are not done. We can do something similar, they thought. They send a message to the Mexican government. Remember, the Mexican government was unstable, right? Declare war on the United States. Attack them. Take back your land. Take back Texas. Take back California. We'll help you. We'll support you. We'll give you anything and everything you need. It's a preemptive strike, right? If Mexico invades the United States, are we going to be concerned about Europe? We might send some, but we're not. We're going to be devoted about our borders, keeping our area secure. However, the British intercept this. And it's like, oh yeah. They eagerly present that to the United States. Public opinion, you can imagine, soars to join the war. Anti-Germanism skyrockets. Mexico obviously does not do this, but it, in short, sorry for the language, pisses Americans off. One thing you don't do in the United States, make Americans mad or unify them like that. Push for war. Also, at the same point, the Germans will start sinking American ships again. Unrelentingly, the Sussex Pledge will be broken. This all culminating in the declaration of war by about mid 1917.
Are we the most powerful country?
No, we are not the most powerful country at this point. We will not be the most powerful country economically, politically, militarily until after World War II. However, we had thousands of troops that could come fight. The French had a problem. French soldiers were disobeying direct orders of their officers. This essentially put it this way a little bit, see if you can watch me. This was the French model of fighting the war. Watch the video closely.
Running it.
If that's a machine gun nest, what's going to happen?
Shot.
Sorry, that was a little bit dramatic. Hopefully it woke you guys up, but you get the point, right? Brock, if I tell you, I'm an officer right here, tell you to charge there, are you going to charge? No, because why? It's stupid. The Germans were guilty of stupidity of like that as well. The British were, but the French were the worst. French soldiers will disobey orders, right? You run up to that hill. Now, to put it in perspective, I ran full head into that door, right? I could probably dodge some bullets, not like Patriot style, but just rolling, diving, etc. Imagine you have to step up with a weapon that weighs probably 10, 15 pounds. So you're stepping up, coming up over. How much more are you open to combat or weapons? A lot more, right? They'll actually execute French soldiers for disobeying direct orders. Not many, because they don't have a lot, but they do it to send a message, right? So the French are like, all right, America, come to war. Yeah, you're coming to war. What do you think the French have in their mind? They're going to pull their soldiers off, embed American soldiers, and let them be the cannon fodder, right? America knows this. American officers know this. And they're going to be very slow to integrate American troops. And in fact, Pershing will say, General Pershing that did the Mexican stuff, they're going to say, we want American units led by American officers. We don't want, the Americans are necessarily leaps and bounds better, but we've been reading the paper. We know that it's a slaughter. We know things have been going well. Now, so American soldiers come. We talked about that. Now, winning the war at the sea. Now we got to get American soldiers over there. The British method was to hunt down warships, sink the German submarines. Germans' primary naval focus will be submarines. And essentially, their navy perspective was once again mimic their trench. Okay, I've got a boat full of troops and supplies. Go as fast as I can, right? While German submarines are waiting. The American method is, okay, Zach, you're a battleship. Brock, you're a little cruiser. Dalton, you're some paddly whack shit. Aiden, you're a rowboat. Okay. But the point of this is we're going to be safety in numbers, right? We put the ships out. We have the battleship cruiser that can sink a submarine and detect it amongst the ships, right? Convoy, we're going to go fast, but we're going to go protected in groups, like safety in numbers. Is a wolf going to attack a large group? Or is it going to look for the lone ship by itself, running as fast as it can? Yeah, the little rowboat. This came up by Admiral William S. Sims. Convoys, no American soldiers will be lost at sea due to using this method. And by the way, fast forward to World War II, it's the exact same method we use in World War II. Now that, obviously there's ships that are attacked in World War II, but World War II, it's another effect. Convoy system is effective. Okay, I know I'm kind of jumping around here on the PowerPoint, it's not perfect. World War, the war itself, towards the end. America enters the war. We bring fresh bodies. Now remember, Russia is taken out of the war in 1917, and I think there's another slide that goes into detail on that. I'll bring that back up again. The Germans are braining hundreds, thousands of troops from the Eastern Front that have been fighting the Russians to the Western Front. The Allies are worried that there's going to be this last great push. There is. March of 21st, 1918, right as American soldiers are really starting to get to Europe, the Germans are going to push deep into France again. However, American forces will be rushed to the front along with French forces. They will stop the German advance. Very bloody, very costly. but the advance is stopped. The Germans, as great as military empire as they were, didn't have enough supplies. They were running out of food. The one thing the German government's going to do very effectively is they're going to keep the plight of the war from everyday Germans. Most Germans thought they were winning the war, which is important narrative to understand. So the German homeland, hey, yay, Russia's out of the war, we're doing good, right? Victories. One of the most famous American engagements during this war is the Battle of Argonne Forest. General Pershing, the American general, will launch an attack against the Germans. Over 600,000 men on the American side will march against the Germans. Though it's costly, it's bloody, we will slowly push the Germans back. Like I said, the Germans had exhausted a lot of their resources on that last offensive. The war will come to an end. Austria-Hungary will have a revolution. Just a little spoiler alert, they will split into two countries after this war, Austria and Hungary. Ottoman Turks will surrender. Ottoman Empire is pretty much modern-day Turkey. Germany will force the Kaiser out. The Kaiser had been ruling Germany since 1871. And then on November 11th at 11 a.m. on the 11th month, the armistice. Today we celebrate Veterans Day that day, but the original November 11th was the signing of not the treaty to end the war, just the armistice that says we will stop fighting. Last slide for today. So, as the war is about to come to an end, President Wilson is kind of an international hero, at least in Europe, because he's brought America to help the great powers of the world, right? We needed America. Wilson's a progressive president. He kept us out of the war as long as he could, but now we were forced into it. As I said, in 1917, Vladimir Lenin overthrew the Russian government, got rid of the monarchy, established a socialist state later on. The one thing Lenin does, publish these secret treaties to divide up conquered territory after the war. He publishes this information, which is kind of basically all the European countries that were vying to win this war, so France, England, and all, they had a plan to divide up all the land that they could win. Wilson had no desire for this, but it's an embarrassment because the United States, we're on a moral compass to fight this war, and now the European countries are like all basically going to divide up the spoils if they win the war. Not too popular back home concept, right? This also makes the Germans mad. They're going to divide up all our land if they win the war. So it's extra motivation for the Germans. Now, as a counter reaction to this, Wilson will issue the 14 points. And this is one thing you will read. It was his things that he thought would be the best course to end the war. Wilson issued them, and as you read through, basically 14 key points that he thought would preserve the world, avoid future wars, and rebuild Europe. One of the underlying beliefs or concepts behind 14 points: no one bears no one bears sole responsibility for the war. Everyone shares a little bit of the blame.
I thought Germany had the most they had to pay out of it. Or
We're going to get to that. We'll get to that. When you read the Treaty of Versailles, you'll come to realize that the treaty that was actually forced to be signed by the Germans actually did not want to sign that treaty. Germany says sole responsibility for the war and has to pay it's like you take out $100 loan to pay off something, and then the next thing you know, you owe $100 billion. Are you ever going to pay that off? No, you're not. It's unrealistic. And that's what I want you when you look at the 14 points. The 14 points had a lot of good ideas. All territory would be returned to pre-war status. Basically, a lot of key elements that would appease both sides. So when you read both those documents, you'll see the international perspective and the American perspective in this war are drastically different. If we'd have taken more of the 14 points, I think we could have did a lot more good to the world. I'm not saying that I'm just because we're American and all that. It was actually a good proposal. The reality is American forces will turn the tide of the war. So we should have a say in this. If we don't enter the war, there's a good chance the Germans win the war. It's not like, ooh, we'd all be speaking German in Western Europe. It's not like it would have been bad. It'd have been more like, hey, Germany won the war. They're going to make the other countries pay the war reparations or agree to Germany's dominance of Central Europe, right? The Germans were not all oppressive. They were not a crazy bad group of people. They're not the Nazis. And as historians and students, we often fail to realize this is not the Nazis. We always want to look at history through a backwards lens, right? It's very difficult. You have to look through a forward lens from the past to get to the future, right? How hard is it to imagine a world in which slavery still existed? It's very hard, right? We can't comprehend it. As in this case, you can see where the difficulties are starting to arise. The main American engagement was Massu Argam, but we could go for hours. I could spend days talking about actual strategies of the war. But the realities is the American involvement is very short, but very, very precise. Okay. Tomorrow, or Monday, I should say, we'll get into the war at home. We'll get into more of the war post effects. But as you read that chapter 19 reaction quiz and get into 14 points in Treaty Versailles, I want you to understand the conditions it creates in the world. We'll obviously talk about the home front Monday, and then we'll get into the post-war and things that changed in America. But the conditions that exist in Germany and Western Europe after this war
create the Nazis.
Well, it does to some degree create the Holocaust. Now, the one thing I will tell you, even to this day, there is still a not natural, but a wide range of anti-Semitism around the world. The Jewish people are still heavily persecuted. They can't even have their own country without being constantly persecuted, which is ironic. So, well, the Holocaust, remember, but yet the country of Israel is still fighting every single day to keep its existence a reality.
I thought during this time though, this is when Germany is super down, so then Hitler comes in and
well, you're on the right track now. What happens is the condition in Germany are prideful. Remember, I said Germany thought they were winning the war, right?
Yeah.
Now the war ends. They are the wrong. They are the blamer. They are supposed to pay millions and billions of dollars to the victors. What gives? A lot of the people that were successful in Germany or made bad decisions for Germany were associated to be Jewish or Jewish ancestry. Hitler buys into that. The Nazis buy into that. Though it never becomes a mass belief structure, honestly, this is one thing that will surprise you. Mass droves of Germans probably knew nothing about the Holocaust, or they just heard that Jews were being rounded up and didn't think too much about it. Kind of like, if it doesn't affect me, am I going to dig? No. But the conditions are created in Europe for World War II to happen because of all the outcome of how the Allies handled World War I. Spoiler alert, the biggest thing that they took away from 14 points was the creation of the League of Nations. Basically, where the worlds could come together, countries of the world, solve the problems. We never ratified the Treaty of Versailles because Congress said this is a bad treaty. Oh, by the way, you can't join the League of Nations unless you ratify the treaty. So we never joined the League of Nations, which was all of Wilson's brainchild. So the conclusion of this war is messy. It's bad. And European countries will ultimately pay the price for really their stupidity after World War I. And that's where we'll start Monday. We'll get into the war at home in the United States, and then we'll get into the post-war. This is an American history class. I could spend hours on the European. But I just want you to understand this lays the foundation for World War II and the conditions that will ultimately really transform the rest of Europe.